Hey everybody, this is Perch, and once again, I'm sitting here just recording off the laptop speakers, and I'm staring at the nice Yeti Blue little microphone here that I spent well over $100 for, that is not plugged in because I'm an idiot. Anyway, it's always good too when I turn my face away from the little mic on the laptop to look at the microphone, and then the audio gets even worse. It's that's a quality content you pay for here, folks. Anyway. Um, I have a thought, and again, sometimes there's topics that I don't know that I'm going to land. I talk about them. Every now and then I talk with other YouTubers. They're like, well, how do you do so many videos? Do you write this stuff down? I'm like, no, it's just all off the top of my head. That's always true. So, I'm just having a conversation. I think many years of working in the shop did this. I think I'd be more witty and funny and better if I wrote stuff down, but you're just kind of getting things are. And I have a very dry sense of humor, which doesn't translate that well to YouTube. Anyway, um, I did the interview with Ron Mars, and I was really excited and happy we did it, and I'm hoping we can do more. That definitely generated a handful of people who were angry about it in the comments. Thankfully, not too much. I got about 5 emails of people saying they were never going to support my channel again because I interviewed the guy. And to them, I say, oh, okay. I mean, it. I don't want to pull out a Kelly Sue kind of comment here, but look, as I've said all along, a lot of people were happy to hear. I'm going to interview everyone, and I do. I'm happy to interview everyone. Now, whenever I say that, people are like, well, what about this person I like? I'm like, I'd be happy to interview him. Bring him on. Happy to. I was all set to interview Shane Davis. He had a baby. I mean, very inconsiderate. Wound up having a baby that day. Good times. I'll interview people, especially people who have something to say. As I mentioned in other interviews, or when talking about interviews, I do try and look for people who haven't been interviewed a ton. And when I do the interview, I try and think about things to ask them that aren't. I know Joe has the same philosophy. He does these interviews with me, and we try and ask things you haven't heard 50 times before. Like we are working on getting to Jim Shooter. I don't know why that's so hard, but I'm just sometimes it's clear some people I can get a hold of very easily. Some people are tough, but I don't want to talk to Jim Shooter and be like, okay, my first question is, what was it like at Marvel? Like we want to ask something new, something that hasn't been done before. When we interview Chris Claremont, I don't want to asking like, so tell us how you came up with the idea for the Dark Phoenix saga. It's like there's literally 50 interviews that do that. But anyway, I'll interview everyone. And again, most people are happy to hear that until I guess the person that they don't like is interviewed. But I mean, a guy like Ron Mars was great. Here's somebody who's been in the business 30 years. He's written a lot of comics. It's funny because I I saw somebody, it's the exact same person who was screaming about, literally, well, not screaming, I mean typing, but all in caps of, I'm not going to support this channel again because of this interview. And I have an earlier mail because Gmail will group the stuff. And an earlier mail, they're like, I'd really like to hear more about the Marvel DC crossover that happened and what the thinking was at the time. And I'm like, hey, dummy, who do you think wrote that? But anyway, it is what it is. I understand the inflamed tension. I understand why people, particularly when you're blocked, it feels very personal and it's irritating. And I don't agree with. I never agree. Actually, all the people I've ever interviewed, there's never been somebody I've agreed with down the line. But there were some interesting things that came out, and one of those is this, and this is where I want to talk through kind of what I'm thinking here, because I feel like there's a really big story or a big there's like an hour to 2 hour debate on this topic alone. I don't know exactly how to get to it, but it'll be interesting. So let me try and at least roll out the beginnings. Maybe some of you in the comments can kind of help me out in how we conduct this, because every now and then when you talk to people, it feels like you get like a little tease of, hey, there's a lead to follow here. There's an important moment that we could get into. So Ron Mars was talking, and he kind of dropped in very casually about comics being geared toward older white men, and this is a refrain you've heard from a lot of people. And if you listen to the interview, I didn't push back because I don't view these interviews as being combative. My goal is to just open stuff up and have people come back. But I did mention in the interview, it's like that's not been my experience though. And I didn't go into it heavily there. Again, the moment kind of passed, and as in my head, I was like, I should come back to this at some point, but I want to come back to it with more one person. I don't want to have it to be, me putting Mars on the spot, because I want to, this would be a good one for a panel. Running a shop. Now, this is an observation of one, right? It's my truth. It's what I've seen. Now, I'm in a lot of Facebook groups and other things, and I've asked this question a decent amount of times, and I've gotten different answers. And I have never had the experience or the feeling that my clientele was all made up of older white men. In fact, to the contrary, I always had a pretty decent female population of customers, and not just up here in the Pacific Northwest. As you know from kind of other comments I've made, other videos, I had shops in New Mexico and Colorado and Arizona and in places of Four Corners and kind of moving up to this area. And even more so, I would, in fact, if anything, if I had to kind of weigh it, I would say I have more white male customers up here in the Seattle area than I did down there in the Four Corners, and in Colorado and some of those places. There was a heavy Latino and heavy Native American population that bought comics. In fact, I mean, I would say very, very heavy Navajo and Ute, I believe, population that would buy comics, and lots of women that would buy comics. So much so that I would have never portrayed the business that way. And when I talk to other people, I get a similar story. Now, it's if you really break down the demographics, like the country, if you have a majority white population and comics getting more expensive, probably gears itself more to more affluent white population. Maybe, I don't even know if that's a thing, but it wasn't overwhelming. It felt more demographical, and if anything, more on the end of women in particular. It's probably, I'm trying to think of it in terms of race and gender for the moment. And I think I always had more female customers than you would expect, certainly by what's said. And it always irritated me. You've probably heard me complain about that. I've had these people at various times do these little speeches about, these dirty comic shops with their white men. And it hurts. It pokes me personally. I take that, I'm irritated by that statement because it's so blatantly false. And people are using it in order to try and paint this picture of this crummy industry with these, bigoted people. That's why they're doing it. That's why they put those comments out. They're trying to paint a picture that is just not true. And at least from what I saw. Now, granted, maybe my shop had the complete mix of customers, and every other shop in the country was just white men, and that could be. I guess, but once again, when I talk to other retailers, that's never the picture they say either. It's just that's not what I see. And I realize I've been carrying this torch for a while of that comics. It always irks me immensely when I hear this, comics are for, they're sexist and all this other stuff. When comics have pushed more progressive ideas, if you will, for a long time, much longer than other mediums, certainly more than movies. I mean, comics were doing, and especially when it comes to LGBTQ stuff, comics were out there in front a lot. And so when you see these comments that get rolled out of, well, we've got to change comics because they've always been, bigoted. It's an ignorant statement. It drives me crazy to hear it. I think, as again, from probably in the past, you've heard me, I think the market should decide what sells. I don't think you should social engineer what's sold, but it's also untrue to claim that comics is done less than it has. It's done quite a bit. Take it for what it's worth. Maybe you love that, maybe you hate it. It doesn't really matter. It's still a fact. Comics have done a lot more. So this was in the interview, and there was this brief little moment where I mentioned, it's like, but that's not my experience in the store. And then it kind of came out that, well, maybe this is how the publishers view the market. And that was like the light bulb that went off over my head is, wait a minute. We're not talking about that enough. You see this battle that goes on, and there's so many YouTube videos about it and tweets and movements that have been portrayed around this topic, around this kind of perception of a battle between, comic pros who say that, there's a segment of the fans they're hateful bigots. And then the fans saying that's not true. We're not hateful bigots. And the battle, and that battle continues. And I think it's a very unfair, it's a very trolling, it's a very social media like battle to have. It's mainly, I think, comprised of people who just want to pick at each other. But what if, for the moment, what if the message here, or what if the thing to follow here is, hey, has everybody kind of missed it? Why did we go down the path of comic fans here? Why isn't more of the conversation around, hey, is it that the comic publishers, not the fans, not the customers, not the retailers, but the publishers, is it that the publishers misunderstand their market? Is it that the publishers keep going back to, steering toward quote unquote white male projects? Because that's a very different statement than the customers are all bad. Then these little cartoons of these creepy comic stores filled with like borderline Nazi people in them. That's never been what I've seen. It's never been the shop I ran. It's not what other people say. But what if what's kind of coming out here is, what if it's the publishers who have this built-in perception about this? Because when you start to pull on that thread, it starts to that starts to paint an interesting picture. Because I've done these videos lately, particularly about the fact that Marvel, more than anyone, but DC certainly guilty of it, can't seem to write or produce black characters. You look at the news here, Luke Cage, 50th anniversary. Ghost Rider, also 50th anniversary. Ghost Rider gets an ongoing series. Luke Cage gets a 3-issue series that then gets canceled before it shipped out. That seems weird, again, for a company that will happily put Black Lives Matter and other things on their social media tags. But as the publisher, why do they keep going back to the same well? Why are there so many stories of creators who struggle to get a book going with minority characters? And so what if there is some truth to that statement? It's just that people have been looking for it in the wrong place. Because it's interesting, because if there's some truth to this, and this is where it'd be great to have a panel and some people talking about it, then this entire giant fight, not the whole thing, but a big portion of it, it gets kind of interesting in the sense that we've allowed the creators, freelancers, to fight it out with the customers and fans, and vice versa, that there's this war that goes on between them. Meanwhile, the publishers, the FTEs, kind of sit back and continue to prioritize the opposite of what they claim. Why is it, for example, we did the interview with Rachel Pollack, who is a trans writer, and she did quite a good long run on Doom Patrol. Why is it that that title was not collected like forever, while at the same time the company DC is saying, we're behind Pride, we're doing these anthologies and all this? Why all these creators in their past who, if you're DC, couldn't you say, hey, back in the early 90s, we had a trans writer on a book following Grant Morrison, who's, Grant Morrison's recently come out as non-binary, but, we had Rachel there doing a book, and here's a collection of it. Wouldn't that be more meaningful to respect your past and your history and give her some money and give people something they want? There's a lot of people been asking for that run collected. That's not something on the creators. That's not something on the fans and customers. That's a publisher decision. If you go down the line, I believe you've heard there was we had a gay black man who did a big portion of the Ghost Rider run in the 90s. Do we hear about him? No. You go down the line of characters. Anyway, this is an interesting point. And again, it came out in that interview, just talking about this thing, and it just makes me feel a little bit like, has this all been a bit of a diversion to get the freelance creators and the fans bitching at each other, while meanwhile, and drag the retailers and drag these shops and drag all these other people. While at the publisher level, things are being done with a 1950s mentality, but still desiring all the social cred of of a modern company, because that's what it feels like. When we're putting the pride emblem on comics, but we're not sending royalty checks back to people who have created in the past. I mean, feel I don't know. There's something there. All I'm saying is I'm throwing this out as a topic. Again, this feels like a bigger deal. I just haven't quite wrapped my head around it completely. Of just, there's something here, and there's been so much volume of videos and commentary and tweets and everything else about this topic, about fans who are hateful and creators fighting against it and everything else, where it feels like the true battle is the other direction. Those people are getting off scot-free. I don't know. Something to think about. A little bit of I love doing these interviews. They bring up interesting thoughts. Maybe I'm all wrong here, but I don't know. Feels like people got duped. It's like which cup has the ball in it. Feels like we're all looking at the wrong cup. I don't know. Something to think about. Let me know your thoughts below. Thanks for listening.